If you grew up in America, you were probably fed a very specific storyline. Go to college, get a good job, get married, and above all else, buy a house. For generations, renting has been stigmatized. Your parents, your grandparents, and your know-it-all Uncle Bob at Thanksgiving have all probably told you the exact same thing. Renting is just throwing money away. But what if I told you that the math, the real math, tells a completely different story? What if the great American dream of home ownership is actually the greatest wealth trap of the 21st century for the average person? Today, we are going to dismantle the lies you've been told about real estate. We are going to put renting and buying head-to-head over a 30-year timeline. And I promise you, by the end of this video, the way you look at a mortgage will never be the same. Welcome back to the channel. Let's set up a scenario. Meet two people, Mark and Sarah. They are identical in every financial way. They both make $100,000 a year. They both have $60,000 sitting in the bank. They both live in the same mid-sized American city. But on January 1st, their paths diverge. Mark decides it's time to build equity. He buys a $500,000 house. He puts down $50,000, which is 10%. He pays about $10,000 in closing costs. He gets a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 6.5%. He gets the keys, posts a selfie on Instagram, and feels like a winner. Sarah, on the other hand, rents the exact same model of house right down the street. Her rent is $2,500 a month. She takes the $60,000 she would have spent on a down payment and closing costs, and she dumps it straight into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. Mark looks at Sarah and thinks she's a fool. He's paying his own mortgage, she's paying her landlord's mortgage. But Mark is entirely ignoring something called unrecoverable costs, and this is where the house of cards begins to collapse. The biggest mistake buyers make is comparing their mortgage payment directly to a rent payment. Mark's principal and interest payment is about $2,844 a month. Sarah's rent is $2,500. Mark thinks, hey, for just $300 more, I own the place. Wrong. Let's look at Mark's real monthly bill. First, property taxes. In the U.S., the average is about 1.1%, so on a $500K house, that's $458 a month. Next, homeowner's insurance. Let's call it $150 a month. And by the way, that's skyrocketing depending on what state you live in. Because he put down less than 20%, Mark gets hit with PMI, private mortgage insurance. That's another $150 a month just to protect the bank. We are already at $3,602 a month. And then comes the silent killer, maintenance. The rule of thumb is that you will spend 1 to 2% of your home's value on maintenance every single year. A roof costs $15,000. An HVAC system costs $8,000. When Sarah's water heater breaks, she sends a text message to her landlord. It costs her $0 and zero stress. When Mark's water heater breaks on a Sunday night in December, he's out $2,000 and his basement is flooded. Let's define unrecoverable costs. This is money that leaves your pocket and you never, ever get it back. For Sarah, her rent is 100% unrecoverable, but for Mark, his property taxes, his insurance, his maintenance, and his mortgage interest are all unrecoverable. In the first 5 years of a 30-year mortgage, roughly 80% of your monthly payment goes strictly to interest. You aren't buying a house, you are renting money from a bank. When you actually run the numbers, Mark is throwing away just as much money as Sarah is. The only difference is that Mark is throwing it at the bank, the county tax assessor, and Home Depot, while Sarah is throwing it at a landlord. Now, let's talk about the most important concept in personal finance, opportunity cost. It's not just about the money you spend, it's about what that money could have done if you deployed it somewhere else. Remember Sarah? She took her $60,000 and put it into the S&P 500. Historically, the stock market returns about 7 to 10% per year adjusted for inflation. Real estate, historically, appreciates at about 1 to 4% a year after inflation. Houses do not make you rich through rapid appreciation. They barely outpace inflation. Furthermore, Sarah's total living costs are $2,500. Mark's true total monthly costs, including maintenance and taxes, are closer to $4,000. Because Sarah is financially disciplined, she takes that $1,500 difference every single month and invests it. She is dollar-cost averaging into the greatest wealth-building machine in human history, the global stock market.
Then there is the psychological cost. Mark is anchored. If a dream job opens up in London or Austin or Tokyo, Mark has to sell his house. Selling a house costs 6 to 10% in realtor fees and closing costs. If Mark sells his $500,000 house after 3 years, he will pay $35,000 just in fees to get out of it. It entirely wipes out any equity he built. Sarah breaks her lease, maybe pays a 1-month penalty of $2,500, packs her bags, and takes the promotion. So, how do you know if you should rent or buy? You shouldn't guess. You shouldn't listen to your uncle. You should use a mathematical framework. My favorite is the 5% rule, popularized by financial portfolio managers. The 5% rule gives you a quick break-even point to compare renting versus buying based on unrecoverable costs. You take the value of the home you want to buy, multiply it by 5%, and divide it by 12 months. Why 5%? 1% goes to property tax, 1% goes to maintenance. 3% represents your cost of capital, the money you were losing by having your down payment tied up in a house instead of the stock market, plus mortgage interest. Let's run Mark's $500,000 house. $500,000 multiplied by 5% is $25,000. Divide that by 12 and you get $2,083. Here's the golden rule. If you can rent an equivalent home for less than $2,083 a month, renting is mathematically the superior financial decision. If equivalent rent in your area is $3,000, then buying the house is the better move. It is that simple. It is market dependent. In places like San Francisco, New York, or Seattle, the rent-to-price ratio is heavily skewed. You might see a $1.5 million house that rents for $4,500 a month. The 5% rule on a $1.5 million house is $6,250. Renting in those cities is an absolute no-brainer. But in the Midwest, say Ohio or Indiana, you might find a $250,000 house that rents for $2,000. The 5% rule says the unrecoverable cost of buying is only $1,041. In that market, buying crushes renting. Now, if you've been listening to the math, you might be thinking, renting is amazing. I'm going to rent forever and be a millionaire. But here's where I have to play devil's advocate, because human beings are not spreadsheets. Remember Sarah, our financially disciplined renter? The math only works for Sarah if she actually takes the $60,000 down payment and puts it in the market. It only works if she takes that $1,500 a month she saves by not owning a home and actually invests it. But what does the average American actually do? The average renter doesn't invest the difference. They upgrade their car. They go to Tulum for the weekend. They inflate their lifestyle. If you rent and you spend the difference instead of investing it, you will wake up at 65 years old with zero assets, and you will be at the mercy of rising rental rates forever. This is the single greatest argument for buying a house. A mortgage is a forced savings account. The bank holds a gun to Mark's head every month and says, "Give us $3,000 or we take your house." So Mark pays it, and over 30 years, slowly, agonizingly, he builds $500,000 in equity. Home ownership forces financially undisciplined people to build wealth. If you lack discipline, buy the house. It will save you from yourself. We're nearing the end of our journey, and it's time to summarize. Over a 30-year timeline, if Mark buys the house and Sarah rents and invests the difference, who wins? If Sarah is disciplined, she almost always wins. Her net worth will likely be 20 to 30% higher than Mark's, and her wealth will be completely liquid. She won't have to sell a roof to buy groceries in retirement.
But buying a house is not a bad idea, provided you meet these 4 criteria. You plan to live in the exact same location for at least 7 to 10 years. You need time to offset the massive closing costs. The 5% rule shows that your market favors buying over renting. You have a fully funded emergency fund on top of your down payment. You want to customize your space, and you place a high emotional value on nesting. Renting is the superior choice if you are in your 20s or 30s and value career mobility. You live in a high cost of living coastal city. You are financially disciplined enough to automate investments into the stock market every single month. You hate fixing toilets, mowing lawns, and dealing with surprise $10,000 bills. The great housing lie is that one path is universally better than the other. Renting is not throwing money away. Paying an unrecoverable 6.5% interest rate to a bank for 30 years is throwing money away. Buying a house is a lifestyle choice. It is a consumption good. It is a place to raise your kids, paint the walls blue, and put a dog in the yard. Buy a house because you want a home. Do not buy a house because society guilt-tripped you into thinking it was the only way to build wealth. Do the math for your own life. Run the 5% rule. Be honest about your own spending habits, and stop taking financial advice from Uncle Bob. If this video changed the way you look at real estate, hit the like button and subscribe for more real financial math. Let me know in the comments, are you Team Mark or Team Sarah? I'll see you in the next one.